Chapters 32 to 34 of Tristram Shandy, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, Gentleman, Volume 2, by Laurence Sterne. Chapter 32. There was not any one scene more entertaining in our family, and to do it justice in this point, and here I put off my cap, and lay it upon the table close beside my inkhorn, on purpose to make my declaration to the world, concerning this one article, the more solemn, that I believe in my soul, unless my love and partiality to my understanding blinds me, the hand of the supreme Maker and first Designer of all things never made or put a family together, in that period at least of it which I have set down to write the story of, where the characters of it were cast or contrasted with so dramatic a felicity as ours was for this end, or in which the capacities of affording such exquisite scenes, and the powers of shifting them perpetually from morning to night, were lodged and entrusted with so unlimited a confidence, as in the Shandy family. Not any one of these was more diverting, I say, in this whimsical theatre of ours, than what frequently arose out of this self-same chapter of long noses, especially when my father's imagination was heated with the enquiry, and nothing would serve him but to heat my uncle Toby's too. My uncle Toby would give my father all possible fair play in this attempt, and with infinite patience would sit smoking his pipe for whole hours together, whilst my father was practising upon his head, and trying every accessible avenue to drive Brignett's and Scroderus's solutions into it. Whether they were above my uncle Toby's reason, or contrary to it, or that his brain was like damned timber, and no spark could possibly take hold, or that it was so full of saps, mines, blinds, curtains, and such military disqualifications to his seeing clearly into Brignett's and Scroderus's doctrines, I say not. Let schoolmen, scullions, anatomists, and engineers fight for it among themselves. 'Twas some misfortune, I make no doubt, in this affair, that my father had every word of it to translate for the benefit of my uncle Toby, and to render out of Slawkenbergius's Latin, of which he was no great master. His translation was not always of the purest, and generally least so where 'twas most wanted. This naturally opened the door to a second misfortune, that in the warmer paroxysms of his zeal to open my uncle Toby's eyes, my father's ideas ran on as much faster than the translation, as the translation outmoved my uncle Toby's. Neither the one or the other added much to the perspicuity of my father's lecture. Chapter 33. The gift of ratiocination and making syllogisms, I mean in man, for in superior classes of beings, such as angels and spirits, 'tis all done, may it please your worships, as they tell me, by intuition, and beings inferior, as your worships all know, syllogize by their noses. Though there is an island swimming in the sea, though not altogether at its ease, whose inhabitants, if my intelligence deceives me not, are so wonderfully gifted as to syllogize after the same fashion, and oft-times to make very well out too. But that's neither here nor there. The gift of doing it, as it should be, amongst us, or the great and principal act of ratiocination in man, as logicians tell us, is a finding out the agreement or disagreement of two ideas one with another, by the intervention of a third, called the medius terminus, just as a man, as Locke well observes, by a yard finds two men's 9-pin alleys to be of the same length, which could not be brought together to measure their equality by juxtaposition. Had the same great reasoner looked on as my father illustrated his systems of noses, and observed my uncle Toby's deportment, what great attention he gave to every word, and as often as he took his pipe from his mouth, with what wonderful seriousness he contemplated the length of it, surveying it transversely as he held it betwixt his finger and his thumb, then fore right, then this way, and then that, in all its possible directions and foreshortenings. He would have concluded my uncle Toby had got hold of the medius terminus, and was syllogizing and measuring with it the truth of each hypothesis of long noses, in order as my father laid them before him. This, by the by, was more than my father wanted. His aim, in all the pains he was at in these philosophic lectures, was to enable my uncle Toby not to discuss, but comprehend, to hold the grains and scruples of learning, not to weigh them. My uncle Toby, as you will read in the next chapter, did neither the one or the other. Chapter 34. "'Tis a pity," cried my father one winter's night, after 3 hours' painful translation of Slawkenbergius. "'Tis a pity," cried my father, putting my mother's thread-paper into the book for a mark, as he spoke, "that truth, brother Toby, should shut herself up in such impregnable fastnesses, and be so obstinate as not to surrender herself sometimes up upon the closest siege." Now it happened then, as indeed it had often done before, that my uncle Toby's fancy, during the time of my father's explanation of Prignitz to him, having nothing to stay it there, had taken a short fly to the bowling-green. His body might as well have taken a turn there too, so that with all the semblance of a deep schoolman intent upon the medius terminus, my uncle Toby was in fact as ignorant of the whole lecture, and all its pros and cons, as if my father had been translating half Slawkenbergius from the Latin tongue into the Cherokee. But the word siege, like a talismanic power in my father's metaphor, wafting back my uncle Toby's fancy, quick as a note could follow the touch, he opened his ears, and my father, observing that he took his pipe out of his mouth, and shuffled his chair nearer the table as with a desire to profit, my father, with great pleasure, began his sentence again, changing only the plan and dropping the metaphor of the siege of it, to keep clear of some dangers my father apprehended from it. "'Tis a pity," said my father, "that truth can only be on one side, brother Toby, considering what ingenuity these learned men have all shewn in their solutions of noses." "Can noses be dissolved?" replied my uncle Toby. My father thrust back his chair, rose up, put on his hat, took 4 long strides to the door, jerked it open, thrust his head half-way out, shut the door again, took no notice of the bad hinge, returned to the table, plucked my mother's thread-paper out of Slawkenbergius' book, went hastily to his bureau, walked slowly back, twisted my mother's thread-paper about his thumb, unbuttoned his waistcoat, threw my mother's thread-paper into the fire, bit his satin pincushion in 2, filled his mouth with bran, confounded it, but mark, the oath of confusion was levelled at my uncle Toby's brain, which was even confused enough already. The curse came charged only with the bran. The bran, may it please your honours, was no more than powder to the bull. 'Twas well my father's passion lasted not long, for so long as they did last, they let him a busy life on't, and it is one of the most unaccountable problems that ever I met with in my observations of human nature, that nothing should prove my father's mettle so much, or make his passions go off so like gunpowder, as the unexpected strokes his science met with from the quaint simplicity of my uncle Toby's questions. Had 10 dozen of hornets stung him behind in so many different places all at one time, he could not have exerted more mechanical functions in fewer seconds, or started half so much, as with one single query of 3 words unseasonably popping in full upon him in his hobby-horsical career. 'Twas all one to my uncle Toby. He smoked his pipe on with unvaried composure. His heart never intended offence to his brother, and as his head could seldom find out where the sting of it lay, he always gave my father the credit of cooling by himself. He was 5 minutes and 35 seconds about it in the present case. "By all that's good," said my father, swearing as he came to himself and taking the oath out of Enophus's digest of curses, though, to do my father justice, it was a fault, as he told Dr. Slop in the affair of Enophus, which he seldom committed as any man upon earth. "By all that's good and great, brother Toby," said my father, "if it was not for the aids of philosophy, which befriend one so much as they do, you would put a man beside all temper. Why, by the solutions of noses of which I was telling you, I meant, as you might have known had you favoured me with 1 grain of attention, the various accounts which learned men of different kinds of knowledge have given the world of the causes of short and long noses." "There is no cause but one," replied my uncle Toby, "why one man's nose is longer than another's, but because that God pleases to have it so." "That is Grangouthier's solution," said my father. "'Tis he," continued my uncle Toby, looking up and not regarding my father's interruption, "who makes us all, and frames and puts us together in such forms and proportions, and for such ends as is agreeable to his infinite wisdom." "'Tis a pious account," cried my father, "but not philosophical. There is more religion in it than sound science." 'Twas no inconsistent part of my uncle Toby's character that he feared God and reverenced religion. So the moment my father finished his remark, my uncle Toby fell a-whistling Lilia Bugliero with more zeal, though more out of tune, than usual. "What is become of my wife's thread-paper?" End of chapters 32 to 34.